Today's movie is Titanic. It will almost definitely be the most financially successful film we discuss on this show, not because romantic films don't do well in the box office, but because Titanic is still the number 4 highest grossing film of all time. In 1997, when it came out, it was a phenomenon. I was 15, and so the reason that my friends and I went back to the theater for the 5th and 20th times wasn't the famous special effects or the recreation of the Titanic sinking or the historical drama. It was just 3 words: young Leonardo DiCaprio. The film Titanic is about the sinking of the Titanic, the unsinkable ship that sunk on its first voyage in 1912. 1,500 of the 2,200 people aboard drowned while half-empty lifeboats bobbed just out of reach. It's a brilliant setting for a film. The first-class accommodations included a gymnasium, a swimming pool, smoking rooms, and a Turkish bath. Third-class folks didn't even have access to spots on the lifeboats. About 25% of third-class passengers survived the Titanic sinking, while approximately 62% of first-class passengers survived. The real-life Titanic was a setting for ambition and hope, but it was also a place where different worlds collided with dire effects. The film has a framing device. Bill Paxton plays a treasure hunter looking for the heart of the sea, a huge diamond that is said to have sunk with the Titanic. At the beginning of the movie, we follow him on a deep sea dive as he opens a safe in the wreckage, hoping to find the necklace.
It's payday, boys.
Instead, the safe contains a drawing of a naked woman wearing the necklace. That lady, now in her late 80s, sees her drawing on TV, calls up the treasure hunter, and says, "That was me. I was on the Titanic, and I know you're looking for that big-ass diamond."
I was just wondering if you had found the heart of the ocean yet, Mr. Lovett.
Her name is Rose, and she comes aboard the research vessel and tells the story of her time on the RMS Titanic. The movie takes us into that story, beginning with our 2 leads, Jack and Rose, boarding the ship, all the way through Rose safely being off of the sunken boat and Jack being one of its fallen. Jack, played by young Leonardo DiCaprio, is as poor as they come. He barely has a change of clothes and matches to light his thin cigarettes. He can't afford a ticket on the Titanic, but wins his ticket in a game of poker, which allows him to get on. And once on, he famously feels like,
"I'm the king of the world!"
Rose, played by the beautiful Kate Winslet, is as first class as it comes. She's boarding the boat with scads of trunks, art, jewelry, hats, and her mother, fiancé, and multiple maids.
God, not those finger paintings again. They certainly were a waste of money.
The difference between Cal's taste in art and mine is that I have some. They're fascinating.
Rose is Philadelphia impoverished gentry, engaged to a steel magnate who will put her and her widowed mother in the black again financially. Rose is so despondent at the idea of marrying Cal, her horrible fiancé, played fantastically by Billy Zane, that on their first night at sea, she runs to the back of the ship to jump off of it. Jack saves her.
You let go and I'm gonna have to jump in there after you.
Don't be absurd. You'll be killed.
I'm a good swimmer.
Then the 2 start a romance right under Cal's nose. Rose pulls away from Jack after their first true flash of intimacy. She's being pressured by her mother to save the family and marry rich. But eventually she tells Cal that she's leaving him. And she does so by putting a naked drawing of herself, drawn by Jack, wearing that huge-ass diamond Cal has given her, and nothing else, and putting it in Cal's safe with a note. She and Jack run off together, as far as 2 people can run off while staying on a ship.
When this ship docks, I'm getting off with you.
This is crazy.
I know. It doesn't make any sense. That's why I trust it.
And after the 2 have sex for the first time, in a car on the boat, Titanic strikes the iceberg that will be its downfall and starts to sink. We are almost exactly halfway through the movie when the ship hits the iceberg. The rest of the film is arguably a disaster movie, not a love story. It has Jack and Rose together, in love, and trying to get out of this situation alive. Cal is chasing them with a gun, having planted the diamond on Jack to set Jack up as a thief, even as the ship sinks. Cal gets off the sinking ship by lying that a little girl is his and that they have to get onto a lifeboat together. Jack and Rose go down with the ship. Jack finds a plank for Rose to float on while waiting for help. He freezes to death in the water.
Never let go.
I will never let go, Jack.
It is a romantic tragedy, and it's wrenching to watch. You meet characters in the first half of the movie, dancing and laughing, and then watch them needlessly die one by one in the background. It's a bleak tale, and yet people came in droves and droves again to sit and weep. Here is Russell Mafe, professor of film and media at the University of Idaho, on why the film was so successful and what was at stake in the romance plot in a movie that is so much about tragedy.
I will say this as someone of the generation who saw Titanic on the big screen several times. It was a huge, huge cinematic event. And I think, part of it is obviously attributable to the advances in CGI and the kind of the grand spectacle of it, right? Which obviously we know is good because it's a movie where how it's going to end. And so we're there kind of along the ride for the spectacle of it. And part of that spectacle is, again, right, our fascination with the spectacle of wealth and opulence, right? Wanting to see recreated these experiences of how the wealthy operated in the world. But I think the romance is actually central to that point, right? It's coming out in this moment near the turn of the millennium, in which a lot of U.S. popular culture and global popular culture is grappling with a lot of kind of cultural tensions and changes by using romance as this structure to help navigate these contradictions. In many ways, Titanic operates kind of similarly to the way a lot of Bollywood movies operate, which perform a similar mechanism in which you take two people who should not be together or come from different perspectives or different class perspectives or different political perspectives or ideological perspectives, but we contrive a narrative in which those contradictions that are dividing our world get erased.
Our theme for our next 5 movies is cross-class love. And cross-class love is particularly something that we are obsessed with in the United States. The U.S. myth of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness means the freedom to fall in love with whomever you want. What Titanic does is confront American hypocrisy on this topic. In theory, a person like Cal wants to believe that a real man makes his own luck. But actually, Cal works tirelessly to maintain all of the boundaries of his class so that he is never at risk of losing anything. Here is Russell Mafe again.
Part of this is thinking about the very strange way that U.S. popular culture engages with social class at all, right? I like to tell my students we have this very bizarre relationship with class and that we like to think of the U.S. as like a classless society where there's opportunities for everybody, and yet we're also keenly, acutely aware of social class, not just who has money and who doesn't have money, but also things like who can express the tastes and values of the upper classes, of the affluent, which tastes and values do we deem trashy versus ones that are deemed to be, more socially acceptable. And part of that is we have this really fascinating love-hate relationship with wealth. We are fascinated by wealth. We love the wealthy. We're fascinated by the culture around wealth, how wealthy people act, behave, engage with the world. Everybody wants to be wealthy. Everybody wants to be rich. We love the rich, except we also hate the rich very, very much. We are fascinated by wealthy supervillains. We're fascinated by this idea that if you attain too much wealth, it's a sign of corruption, it's a sign of vacuity, it's a sign that you have somehow become morally degraded because you've taken on this wealth.
Titanic is trying to critique class division. What it ends up saying is basically, hey, poor people are people too, Their deaths are also sad. True. Incomplete, but true. And there are worse things that this megawatt film could say. Here's Russell one last time.
If someone was watching Titanic for the first time, I would ask them to look at how the markers of social class are navigated, right? Remembering that class in America is only partly about money. Class in America is in many ways about your taste, your values, how you dress, how you act, how you behave. So pay attention to the ways that Jack is poor, but signifies that he has cultural capital, right? And that Rose is rich, but signifies that she is not spoiled and can relate to and create a sense of authenticity where they can meet in that middle ground. The fact that Jack knows who Picasso is, it's a narrative nod to say that, like, yes, he's a poor artist, but he's got cultural capital. He knows who Picasso is.
He knows who Picasso is. She's got more to her than just being some poor little rich girl. But they're still worlds apart. She is educated and refined, and he doesn't have 2 dimes to rub together. And when you're watching Jack and Rose be in love on this ship, a significant part of you does believe that if this ship hadn't sunk, they would be able to walk off the deck into a happy life together. Only this ship did sink. And she's first class and he's third. So she survives and he doesn't. I'm Vanessa Zoltan.
I'm Hannah McGregor.
And this is Hot and Bothered.
Ooh, Vanessa, you're gonna have to send me a fruit basket as a formal apology for how sad I felt watching Titanic.
You consented to watching this movie. I in no way was like, Hannah, whether or not you want to watch this movie, we have to talk about Titanic. Absolutely no.
In fact, importantly, when I got halfway through the movie and was messaging you and saying, I am so stressed about the upcoming iceberg, you said, you don't have to watch the second half. And I said, thank you. And then I didn't.
You did not?
Listen, I skimmed through the second half. I 10-second fast forwarded until the very ending because I know we're going to do a whole episode about the endings. So I watched the ending.
Cheater, cheater, pumpkin eater.
This was the first time I had attempted to watch this movie since I saw it once in theaters when it first came out. And I really thought, what I remembered at watching it as a teen was that I cried so hard that I had to go to the washroom after the movie to cry some more. I needed to go and cry for another 20 minutes. And I was like, but surely that was just youthful folly. And I, while skimming through the second half, just sobbed the entire time.
This movie is brutal. Rewatching it now and thinking about the structure of films, the first half of the movie, I was like, every character I'm being introduced to because he wants me to care when he kills them. And by when he kills them, James Cameron doesn't actually kill them. They're fictional characters. But, even Cora, there's this innocent little girl who has a crush on Jack, on Leonardo DiCaprio's character. And you get this you follow Cora at the beginning of the movie, and then you have this very sweet moment between Jack and Cora where Jack is dancing with Cora, and then he's like, I'm gonna go dance with Kate Winslet, and Cora looks crestfallen, and Jack says, you're still my best girl, Cora.
Still my best girl.
And I was watching, and I was like, well, this little girl is gonna die, and that's why he's having me have this cute moment. And then you don't watch Cora die in the movie, and so I Googled it, because I was like, that's weird. James Cameron is a filmmaker who loves symmetry. Where is Cora? And it got cut from the movie. It was too hard. Cora is one of the characters who gets locked up behind a gate in steerage by an employee of the Titanic. So it is a working class person locking up a working class person that kills Cora, and that we actually don't see in the movie because it's too hard to watch.
Amazing to think that this movie could have been more brutal, because it is brutal.
I mean, I feel like I could really genuinely want to take like a whole graduate seminar just analyzing this film without even like getting into the history of the Titanic, right?
Yeah.
Like just talking about this film. But we are here to talk about the love story of Titanic, and we're here to talk about this love story in terms of it being a cross-class love story. And so, what do you think the argument that this movie makes about love is?
Ooh, so I think at its heart, the argument that Titanic is making is that love is freedom, that real love makes you free. And I think that's an important distinction between the relationship Rose has with Cal, the wealthy asshole played by Billy Zane.
Played brilliantly by...
He's so good as a heel in this movie. Like, what a creep. He is great as this sort of wealthy older man who wants to own Rose like any other beautiful object signaling his power and wealth. He wants to like dress her up pretty and have other people pat him on the back and say, yeah, hot wife. Well done. Like, I think Cal thinks he loves her.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the movie wants us to know that's not real love. That's possession, because real love is about freeing a person to be the best possible version of themselves. And what we see between Jack and Rose is that their love for each other makes them kinder, it makes them braver, it makes them like better, more ethical people who make better choices in the face of the day-to-day stresses of, you know, their relative class positions and Rose's family politics, but then ultimately also in the face of massive tragedy.
Yeah.
And I kind of like that. I kind of like that as an argument about love, that love is freedom. I think that's pretty beautiful.
Absolutely. I texted friend and podcaster and sort of like journalist of Titanic, Sarah Marshall, being like, quick, Sarah, what do you think Titanic thinks about love? And she wrote, I think Titanic believes that love can change you by giving you the tools that you need to change your life, and that it's right about that. And I loved that. I think that this is like an epic love story. And so I actually think it says several things about love. Like, I think it says you tie your fate to someone else, right? Like the constant refrain is you jump, I jump. And so I think that it's like, love is accompaniment. And like, if your beloved's fate is to go down on the ship, then it is your job to jump off the lifeboat and go down with the ship. I think that it thinks that love is about looking after each other. It's someone who will keep looking for you and keep looking for you, even if you are in the bowels of the ship, handcuffed
to a pipe. Yeah.
Yep. Rose gets manipulated into believing that Jack has stolen from her. And she realizes that he didn't. And Jack says, how did you learn that I didn't steal from you? And she's like, I realized that I always knew. Right? Like, it's just like, you just have faith in the other person and you just trust the other person, even if you don't have evidence. But I also really do think that this movie thinks, as far as class, that love is a way to change your life and to change your class. And to your point, that love can be about ownership and it can be a trap and about being stuck. But it is also one of the only places where you can class jump or make yourself sort of poorer by tying yourself to someone.
So let's distinguish here between love, romantic love in particular, and marriage.
Right.
Because the movie is very interested in marriage because it is a movie about class, largely a movie about class, I think. And so it is interested in the way that class operates through marriage and intermarriage, right? So Rose is old money, but her family doesn't have money anymore. They are bankrupt, and so she needs to marry somebody who has a lot of money. We've got sort of Kathy Bates present as the unsinkable Molly Brown, favorite character in the movie. Shout out to Kathy Bates, an icon and a total freaking babe in this movie. who, you know, again, is like somebody who married somebody who then struck gold. I think metaphorical gold, maybe oil.
No, I think he struck gold.
Is it
In the
literal
gold rush, he struck gold in Colorado. I mean, according to the documentary musical, so I'm not sure. But John Brown in the musical struck literal silver and gold.
Okay. And that for her as a woman, it's by virtue of marriage that her class position can move. And so for women, marriage is a practical consideration distinct from love. Distinct from romantic love, not distinct from love of all kinds, because a big part of why Rose agrees to the marriage and temporarily pushes Jack away is out of a kind of familial love and responsibility for her mother. And so, you know, I think the fact that Rose and Jack never marry is, again, an indication that the movie wants to distinguish between marriage as an institution and romantic love as a, like, feeling.
But Rose at the end of the movie has sort of posthumously married Jack, right? She's asked for her name as she's on the like rescue ship. They say, "What's your name?" And she says Rose Dawson, right? Like she takes his name. And so I agree with you that it is complicating what marriage entails versus what love can be. But I do also think that Rose is saying, like, what we had, even though it was only like 24 hours, it's so little time, was like a marriage.
Yeah.
He was my family. I am taking his name.
And through that decision, she gets the same thing she would have gotten through actually marrying him, which is freedom from her family. You know, a freedom that comes with a form of loss. She is dead to her family. But had she actually married Jack, she would have become metaphorically dead to her family anyway.
Right.
So there is a sense that, like, by taking his name, she gets the freedom that comes with making the unwise or impractical marriage decision. Nothing less practical than marrying a dead guy. He cannot do anything for you.
It is a bold thing that she decides to let her mother think that she died on the Titanic.
Yeah.
And the movie does not explicitly show that, right? The movie shows Rose hiding from Cal and not letting Billy Zane see that she has survived. And the movie has this shot of her mother being horrified watching people drown and being unsure as to whether or not Rose makes it. But the movie does not show us her mom finding out that her daughter is dead, which presumably happened because of Rose's decision. So
yeah,
it's big. It's big.
You know, and it's big life consequences. She gives up wealth and comfort. Like, she gives up very real possibilities for her life in order to seek out the freedom that comes from being Rose Dawson.
Yeah. And what the movie, I don't think is even subtext. What I think the movie ignores is what she sacrificed on her mother's behalf, which I'm all for. The things that her mother lists, there's this scene where her mother is like literally cutting off Rose's oxygen supply by like tightening Rose's corset. And her mother is giving this lecture to Rose about like, we need you to marry Cal. Presumably there are other wealthy men who are not also abusive, but whatever. She's like, we need you to marry Cal. What do you want to see happen for us to have to get jobs and sell our expensive objects? And I'm like, yeah, that seems fine. Get a job and sell your fancy stuff. I like don't see this as a tragedy. I understand that it's going to be hard, but like she is selling her daughter to a bad man in order to keep their creature comforts. And so I would just be fascinated as to what actually happens to Rose's mom, but that is another film.
I do think part of the way in which the movie takes class seriously is that, her mother seems like a monster in that scene, but we are reminded later that poverty is not just having your beautiful things taken away. Poverty is getting locked behind a gate and left to die.
Yes.
Poverty is, that Rose survives by luck. you know, partially luck, also Jack's sacrifice. But like her little moment where she's like, only 6 people were saved is a reminder, like, they didn't come back for us because they assumed the people in the water were poor people. Like, there's a real stakes to what she is giving up.
Yeah.
We are shown very clearly that, like, working class life is rich and valuable, and also that it comes with, like, very real forms of violence enacted against you.
It's not just that they don't come back because they think the people are poor. They think that the poor people will swamp the boats and that they will die, right? That the rich people will die. James Cameron, it's not entirely an eat the rich movie in a way that I find compelling.
Yeah, he would never. He's not. Oh.
No, there's one scene in particular where I find compelling. There's a moment in which Rose gets put into a lifeboat. Mm-hmm. It's Cal's one moment of humanity in which he is like, no, it's really important that Rose gets into a lifeboat. And she is sitting next to a little girl who is crying and is like, Daddy, what about you? And her dad is rich. And her dad says, Daddy will be on the next boat. Don't worry, sweetie. Daddy will be on the next boat. And you know that the dad, even though he's a rich dad, like that dad's not getting off the boat.
No.
Like, so there seems to be an argument, absolutely, that there's a material difference, right, between putting your daughter safely on the boat and dying next to your child locked behind a gate.
Yeah.
And I think the movie is also arguing that, like, there is some equalizing force in tragedy, that tragedy comes easier to the poor, tragedy comes more extremely to the poor, but that rich man freezes to death in the water just as much.
Yeah, I mean, I don't read that in the same way, because I think the literal structure of the boat is about the fact that tragedy does not come equally to everybody. Like, the boat is a metaphor for the structural oppression of class politics, and the people who get to live are the people with the most power who are on the literal top. And yes, it's women and children first, but that is part of the sort of patriarchal logic of disaster situations, right? That, like...
Well, and it's rich women and children first.
Precisely. It's rich women and children first. And a big part of what this movie is thinking through about class is proximity to whiteness and the way that that relates to class. So the people who are less proximate to whiteness are non-English speaking immigrants who are predominantly in steerage, right? So we've got like the Irish, the Italians, particularly Catholics historically have been excluded from the category of whiteness, which was, you know, sort of generated around white Protestantism. And so part of the white supremacist logic behind women and children first is ensuring futurity for the white race. And the richest people, according to this logic, the richest people on the boat are also the whitest people on the boat. And again, the sort of liberatory impulse of love that the movie is interested in is one that refuses that premise, that refuses the premise that class renders some lives more valuable than others. The film is arguing that just because class renders certain lives materially more valuable than others doesn't mean that, like, it spiritually believes that. The movie, I think, is dealing with that tension. So maybe it's time to chat a little bit about the subtextual stuff, or the stuff that the movie seems to be saying about love that it maybe doesn't know it's saying.
To some extent, I feel like James Cameron doesn't do subtext.
He's not a subtle man.
He is not a subtle man. And this is a movie where, like, I really have a hard time ignoring his fingerprints on it. This movie feels to me at times like it's a soapy excuse to give emotional stakes to this thing that he found really interesting.
His hobby.
Yeah. And, like, I understand looking at the Titanic and being like, tragedy, but also metaphor and, like, fascinating, right? Like, John J. Astor and the designer of the ship and the captain of the ship decide to go down with the ship. and like steerage and rats on one level and literally like fine china on another.
I mean, just building a huge ship, calling it unsinkable multiple times, and then sailing it one time and it immediately sinks and is one of the largest maritime disasters of all time. That's the kind of hubris, Greek tragedy level story that, like,
it's an opera.
You couldn't ask for a better premise for these kinds of larger than life parables about man versus nature, you know? Which frickin' Canadians love stories about being killed by icebergs, by the way. The Canadian fingerprint on this movie, also very powerful.
I understand if I were a filmmaker and someone who looked at the world through what could be a blockbuster, learning about the Titanic and being like, what the hell? This has just been like left on the bottom of the ocean floor for me.
Man, have you guys heard about this big boat?
Yeah, like what the heck? And then also, I can't quite get past the billionaire privilege of it. The like fact that he took a submersible and like looked at this wreckage. The ironic hubris of like, haha, they were hubristic and that's the story. So I'm gonna rebuild it. That seems incredibly hubristic. And it ends with him, of course, saying, I'm the king of the world at the Oscars. Like, usually I'm really good at like getting into a movie and watching the movie as a movie. And this is really hard, especially because of the framing device.
Yeah. And the degree to which Bill Paxton is so clearly meant to be a James Cameron stand-in.
Yeah.
It's a obnoxious self-insert that makes it very hard not to read this through the lens of James Cameron, how famously hot he is for the ocean, and like the really wild things that he did to make this movie.
So the subtext that I see, there's obviously a ton of things that the movie is inadvertently arguing, but the one that I think it's arguing most clearly to me is actually being a treasure hunter is stupid. It is arguing that textually, like Bill Paxton gives this little speech about how he's kind of done looking at the bottom of the ocean. Yeah. And that's when old Rose, drops the diamond that he's been looking for forever. So if he just looked one more day, he would find the thing he's been looking for his whole life. But I do think that the movie is arguing that, like, it's actually the human stories that matter. I could not care flipping less that the china gets ruined. Like, all of those scenes about, like, oh my God, the Monets that got destroyed. I'm like, bleh. And so, actually, I think the subtext of this movie is, like, you could have told it without it taking place on the Titanic, and it would have been just as great.
Yeah, it's definitely got a kind of recursive loop in it of like, it is exploitative and unethical to dig up the resting place of people who died tragically for your own personal gain. Treasure hunting is a monstrous and dehumanizing thing to do. But if you make a multi-billion-dollar grossing movie about the tragedy of people's loss, that one's okay because it's art.
And I do think that there's a difference between treasure hunting and art. Like, this question is fraught of, like, what is the difference between searching for a diamond at the bottom of the ocean and, like, there's a difference between bearing witness to tragedy and telling a story about tragedy in order to make it something that millions upon millions of people have seen, and fictionalizing the fact that the reason that the two guys who were on the lookout for the iceberg didn't see the iceberg in time is because they were watching your two made-up characters make out.
Fun fact.
That really happened.
No, that while James Cameron believed that he had fully constructed both of these characters, there was, in fact, somebody who was recovered from the wreck of the Titanic. Like, their body was recovered from the wreck of the Titanic, whose name was Jay Dawson.
No.
Yeah, and they buried them in Halifax, where a lot of the recovered bodies were buried, and there is a grave. And it's, I think, like the most visited grave of a Titanic.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Somebody who died on the Titanic.
Because hot Leonardo DiCaprio's in there.
Yeah.
What about you, Hannah? What do you think the subtext of this film is?
Okay, so this is like a pretty meta subtext,
Sure.
but I think an appropriate one to talk about in a podcast series that is about movies that are about romantic love. Because I think that the big subtext of this movie is that the most important form of love is heterosexual romantic love. So the movie's features many other kinds of love, right? We see, the father putting his daughter on the lifeboat, knowing that he won't get to join her. We see people making sacrifices and doing things for the many different forms of love that structure their lives. But our protagonists, the story that is positioned as a universal story of human tragedy that can stand in emotionally for this massive loss of life, is attractive white heterosexual romantic love. That is the most universal, the most true, the most pure, the most valuable kind of love, is implied through the entire construction of the movie, pivoting around the two of them and their story. And that is an argument, right? Like, that is not an inherent truth. That is not a culturally universally believed truth. That is making an argument about some forms of love in some way mattering or even meaning more than others.
The only thing I would add to that is that I do think it is like seen in the 90s and probably today as like the most marketable truth.
Mm-hmm.
And like famously at the time, what people are saying is, will this sell in China? Will people go see this movie in China? That's where you make the money. And so I think that there's also this idea, right? Like, this is the story that's going to sell.
Yeah. And I think that our ideas of cultural value and our ideas of marketability are inextricably interconnected in a capitalist world. When we hear movie execs talk about what makes a movie marketable and what makes it not marketable, part of what they are doing is making an argument about what are universalizable or relatable experiences and stories and what are too niche or too weird to appeal to a wide market. And that is one of those things that in the arguing about what will be marketable, those people in a position of huge power over the cultural narratives that we receive are creating the culture in which some stories are seen as universal and some are seen as too niche, right? It's like in the process of saying like, oh, well, we're just giving people what they want.
Sure.
You're actually producing the desire in the audiences and producing the sense of what constitutes the universal and what constitutes the niche.
Right. There's no reason why people in China inherently want to see two white people fall in love. I want to add one other piece of subtext that I think is interesting in this movie that's just occurring to me, which is it is simultaneously incredibly romantic and like we can save each other, we can change each other, we can give each other hope. And it is also incredibly nihilistic. And I think that that is one of the things that I really like about this movie and that works on me. You know, there is a scene, we meet this young woman at the steerage dance. She ends up dancing with Fabrizio. She's like a Swedish woman or whatever, and we sort of see her for a moment.
You said his name wrong. It's Fabrizio.
Sorry, you're right. We do see him dance with this woman. And there's a moment in which Jack and Rose decide to climb onto the other side of the grate as the boat is like going fully vertical. And this young woman decides not to crawl over the grate and to hold on to the grate from the sort of like inside of the boat. And her hands slip and she falls and she dies. And Jack and Rose have, it turns out, made what historically ends up being the right decision. And the movie makes a lot of like Rose and this woman making eye contact and like kind of wondering who's going to survive, like who made the right choice, right? Like they are just looking at each other and they're like, we have made opposite decisions here and neither of us have any reason to believe that we made the right one.
Yeah.
And I love that, right? Like at this moment, Rose has thrown in her lot with the third class people on the ship by like not going on the lifeboat. And so just this like nihilistic, we don't know who's going to survive and only time will tell, while she's like kind of cuddled up in the arms of this beautiful man. I mean, I guess it's text, right? Like, again, because James Cameron has to make everything text.
But what is the subtext of that?
The subtext to me is just like romance really matters and also who the world is chaos and brutal.
Yeah.
It's not as clean as love will get you to sacrifice that door. And so, you know, like someone will survive and someone won't. Or like courage is going to get you to want to turn back your lifeboat like Molly wants to. Molly is like, we got to turn back. Those are your men out there. And everybody else on the boat is too selfish and scared. It's not just love. It's also dumb luck.
Yeah.
The movie is just like, it's brutal in all of those ways. It's brutal in that working class people are going to lock up working class people. And like that is horrible. And that rich people are going to not give a crap about working class people. And just like sometimes it's also just luck. And that love matters. It's all of it.
Yeah, that love matters, but it's not like love absolutely cannot conquer all in this movie. Love can do some things. And again, it's like love can make you braver. Love can make you take big, bold risks. But those big, bold risks could just as easily end, like kind of do end in tragedy, right? Like one of the interesting things about this movie as a love story is that Rose goes back for him and he still dies.
Yeah.
She would have lived either way and he would have died either way. So the big, bold risks that they take are not about her sacrificing herself for him or about her saving his life. The big, bold risk where it ultimately pays off is that she is rendered free by it. The person that she was dies in that water and she becomes somebody else, somebody who gets to live the life that she wanted and that he wanted for her. But that's not love conquering all.
Yeah, and I just think, like, that is part of Cameron's, I don't know, like, almost like theological argument of this movie is, like, you can save each other, you can try to talk each other off of the ledge and successfully talk each other off of the ledge. You can try your best to build an unsinkable ship and also weather.
And also weather.
Yeah.
Okay. I really am excited to talk about class, but before we get off the topic of maritime disasters, I do need to just hit the emergency stop button real quick.
Please.
Okay. So as I was watching this movie, I couldn't stop thinking about Christina Sharp's book, In the Wake. People who know my work know I am obsessed with this book, but I'm sure some of you are new to Hannah and her predilections. So Christina Sharp is a queer Black feminist scholar and writer, and her book, In the Wake, is an argument for the way in which contemporary America lives in the wake of the violence of chattel slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. And by in the wake, she is deliberately evoking both that we live in a time of extended mourning for the unspeakable scale of violence and loss, but also that we are like in the wake of the ship, so that this period of history is still rippling through everything about contemporary culture and is still continuing to shape collective imaginaries. And this is an argument that lots of historians have made as well, that like you can't understand America without positioning it in relation to this foundational violence. And so as I was watching this movie and thinking about the sort of fetishization of a maritime disaster and the amount of time this movie spends looking at a sunken ship, I couldn't stop thinking about it as a kind of sublimation of the violence of the transatlantic slave trade, because the Titanic, as, you know, the single greatest maritime disaster, one, assumes lots of things about what constitutes a disaster and what constitutes loss of life, and two, becomes the sort of imaginary stand-in for a scale and scope of loss of human life that is, I think, within the popular American imaginary, unspeakable and unrepresentable. And so instead, we get these stories that are like, God, wouldn't it be horrible if a bunch of people died on a boat in the ocean? Which, like, so many people, so many Black people died during the Middle Passage, during every stage of their structural dehumanization and rendering as things rather than humans through the process of chattel slavery. For me, this really comes through in the fact that, you know, there's not a hint of a Black person on screen, but both Jack and Rose explicitly refer to themselves as slaves in this movie. At the beginning, Rose refers to the fact that she is returning to America like a slave in shackles. And then in the scene after Jack has been ritually humiliated by her wealthy family over dinner, he says that it's time for him to go back down to the bottom of the ship to row with the other slaves. So there is a literal textual evocation of slavery and of the association of slavery with ships and the violent relocation of people across the Atlantic, but that is subsumed into the story of the Titanic as a story that sort of conceptually fits what, again, like sort of American popular culture can conceive as a tragedy.
I mean, not just American popular culture, right? It's so funny that you bring this up because I was trying to Google, I was like, is this actually the most people who have ever died on a shipwreck? Because, right, like we know that thousands, if not tens of thousands of Black people were sent overboard for insurance claims or for any number of other reasons. And so I'm just like, define shipwreck.
Yeah.
And are we still, year of our Lord 2024, inadvertently or out of just like lack of interest, classifying those human lives, those souls as property, because that is like how they were classified at the time. And it's like a really hard thing to try to figure out if there have been other, not necessarily shipwrecks, but ship incidents in which there was a higher loss of life. And yeah, it's because we just like still don't think about it in that way.
Yeah, and the politics of commemoration and memorialization and what lives we record the loss of.
Right.
What lives we historically recorded the loss of, you know, for historians of the slave trade, simply the process of finding documentation of lives is an incredibly complex archival process.
Yeah, like statistics are just so insufficient.
Yeah, they start becoming dehumanizing pretty quickly as soon as we start counting people, which is an argument the movie makes as well, right? In the scene where old Rose has to sit through a lecture about the logistics of how the boat went down, and she's like, cool, thanks for that extremely cold, unfeeling, and dehumanizing narrative about traumatic experience that I actually went through.
Yeah, I was there. Gee, thanks.
Yep.
What are we learning, Hannah, about this theme of cross-class love?
Oh, man. I mean, we simply don't have time for everything this movie has to say about class. But what really stood out to me was the sort of anxious intertwining of class and masculinity via the comparison of Cal and Jack as possible romantic figures. Because in many ways, Cal is the one with the power because he is wealthy and he uses his wealth and his power to both to attempt to own Rose and to belittle and disparage Jack and make Jack feel small. And he also fails at that because there is a kind of sense woven through the movie that the upper classes are feminized, like out of touch.
They have the bad music.
They've got the bad music. They're boring. Right? But there is also this sense that like Jack is manlier by virtue of his working class nature. You know, Cal's money gives him power and power is linked to masculinity, but ultimately he is emasculated compared to this like virile, self-made bootstraps guy who like comes from nowhere and doesn't know where he's going to end up tomorrow, but he's just going where he's got his little speech he gives at dinner and everybody's kind of like impressed because he's like, I don't want to be tied down by obligations. I go where the wind takes me. So there is this, I think, interesting complexity when it comes to these two men and how their class gives them both power, but really different forms of power.
Yeah, I think the same thing, that each class has its own power and its own romanticizing associated with it. There's this really interesting moment where, they're at this fancy dinner that Jack has been invited to because he, in theory, saved Rose's life, and Cal is thanking Jack for saving Rose's life. But Cal is looking for a match, and Jack, in this very like athletic way, goes like, hey, Cal, here. And Jack has the power, right? Like has fire and has like this sexy way of distributing fire to Cal. And I think it's so interesting the way that the film then at the end of the scene, Cal sends him back the matches in an equally like, I also know how to throw a box of matches way. Whereas like it could have been a moment where Cal like bungles it or decides to hand it back to Jack in like a more effete way. And instead, I do think the movie is truly trying to complicate, Cal's the worst and like pays someone with less money than him to do his henchman, quote unquote, manly work for him.
His ex-cop valet. What a creep.
But they don't totally emasculate Cal.
Mm-mm.
But the way that they give Cal his masculinity is through violence. And so it is also interesting the different forms of violence that we see across the classes, right? Like there's a moment at the steerage party in which two men get into this like very short scuffle, and then they each have a sip of beer and sort of shake hands drunkenly. Whereas Cal, while the ship is sinking, and I always forget about this, while the ship is sinking, is running around with a gun.
Trying to kill Jack. It's wild. Get your priorities straight.
But that's the thing, and that's the thing I think that it is saying about class, is that like you become sort of detached from a kind of reality, whereas like the ship is sinking, and rather than being worried about going down with the ship, you are still trying to shoot someone because your pride has been injured, whereas like Jack and Rose are just trying to flip and survive. So I do think that one of the things that this movie is arguing about class is that you become detached from reality at a certain level of wealth that becomes actually dangerous for your survival, right? And then we find out that Cal does not survive the Great Depression. So rather than dying sort of sacrificing himself for love, he dies sacrificing himself for wealth.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is ultimately what he actually cares about. Yeah. That detachment is really crucial. And I think part of what facilitates that detachment is that the world around you is built to keep you alive so that you don't actually need to think about it.
Right.
You need to actually have survival skills when you aren't surrounded by an entire apparatus that is about keeping you alive and comfortable and cushioned from any difficulties. And that, we see in very real ways how that saves some lives. Like, you get on the lifeboat, but then for other people is like, oh, you are not useful enough to keep yourself alive. And that for me, like, really comes through in that they're uncute meet cute, where he stops Rose from possibly dying by suicide. I mean, he says she wouldn't have jumped, but we don't actually know. But in that moment, there's this really clear connection of the elite upper class with a sort of detachment from life. Such a deep, profound detachment from life that she would rather die than continue to exist in that world. That, like, she feels so trapped by it and so cut off from anything that feels meaningful and real that she's like, well, there's no point to this. And that Jack's intervention in that moment is an intervention that is about, like, reconnecting her to life as a sort of visceral and authentic experience. The treatment of working class society as more authentic than upper class society is like a real popular trope. Yeah, that fetishizes poverty as, somehow romantic, which again is like, one of the movie's internal confusions. It's like, look, this life's actually better. They are all gonna die. So the betterness is ambivalent.
Yeah, I think that the betterness is obviously ambivalent, but I do think the critique that the wealthy are going to keep turning down opportunities to get on lifeboats, like, you see them turning down offer after offer of life belts because they're just going to keep getting offered more life belts. Like, that is the thing that creates hubris and destroys the world. Like that is the hubris that is, I cannot possibly even fly first class. I need to fly private.
Yeah.
I don't know, right? Like, I'm not like pro poverty is more authentic, but I am pro the critique that, like, the rich have become so detached from survival that, like, they are destroying the earth.
Yeah. Yeah. This, you know what? For better or for worse, I do think this movie knows somewhere in its bones that capitalism is a death cult. And that's, always a good reminder.
Yeah. So, Hannah, you should watch this movie if
you don't mind just watching the first half of a movie and then stopping it. I do the same thing with The Sound of Music. I stop when the Nazis get there.
You stop after he tears up the Nazi flag, though, right? Because it's the hottest part of any movie ever.
I stop when they get married.
Ugh, no. You need to stay another 30 seconds.
Vanessa, your turn. Complete this sentence. You should watch this movie if
you like Neapolitan ice cream. This is 1/3 romance movie, 1/3 horror film, 1/3 diamond heist movie. And if you're like, I want all three, this is the movie for you.
Gotta catch them all.
Next week, we are going to talk about the half hour of endings in this movie. There are at least 4 endings, and we're going to talk about all of them. There is a 10 decibel Academy Award winning elephant that we did not talk about in today's episode. And that is Celine Dion's epic power ballad, My Heart Will Go On. And since we had to talk about this song, we thought, why not get the brilliant Julie Hubbert back on the phone? You might remember Julie from our musicology episode when we were covering How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. Julie is the Ladare Robinson Memorial Professor of Music at the University of South Carolina and the writer of Celluloid Symphonies, Texts and Contexts in Film Music History. Let's give Julie a call. Hi, Julie.
Hello. Hello.
I'm so excited to talk to you about My Heart Will Go On. I remember this song having such a big moment in my sort of early teen years. So I would just love to first hear you reflect on the song. Do you like this song? What are your feelings about it?
Well, there's the musicologist in me that can dissect it in terms of has pretty, interesting range, has some really predictable modulation sequences, but that's not what makes a great song. What makes a great song is, does it resonate with people? And by that standard, it's a mega hit. So it's a really great power ballad for sure, which, you can trace that history back. There's reasons why Celine started to make albums with other great opera singers, but also Barbra Streisand, because she has a tremendous, instrument. And it's showcased in the power ballad for sure, which is usually pretty simple melodic material, but a really important modulation in the middle that gives you this kind of lift. It's a perfectly engineered power ballad, and it's really successful for that reason. And it works really well with vocalists like Celine, which is just an incredible instrument. So sure, it's a great song.
So James Horner is the composer and wrote My Heart Will Go On also, right? But he wrote the score for Titanic, which obviously at this point is just truly an iconic score. I'm wondering if you can tell us about James Horner and any thoughts that you have on his influence in cinematic scoring.
Yeah, sure. Up until his death in 2015, he was a really important composer in the Hollywood landscape, for sure. I often teach Horner's scores, but I taught one in particular, which the one I thought was really the best was Field of Dreams. That's a great movie and a great score. And Braveheart's quite good too. I mean, he had a track record of writing, really serviceable underscores. And he has a very similar trajectory like James Cameron. We started out writing sci-fi scores. So his first big hit was Star Trek. But then he pretty adroitly in the mid-90s started to really be the go-to composer for either kind of Clancy novels that were being made into movies with Harrison Ford.
Patriot
yeah,
Games.
kind of like really good, just serviceable contemporary dramas, and then also historical dramas. So he had a really good run right before he got tapped for Titanic with Legends of the Fall and Braveheart. So he really starts to toggle into this realm of orchestral writing, and usually with a really serviceable melodic theme that people could, get attached to, right? Which is why Cameron really came to him for Titanic. And, listeners might already know that was the second collaboration between those two. They had first collaborated on Aliens, that's with an S, the second Alien movie in 86, and had a horrible experience. So had a super falling out. Yeah, because it was one of Cameron's first films too, and he took too long in editing it. Yeah. And he's supposed to give Horner 4 or 5 weeks to write the score. And instead, he kept editing up until about 2 weeks before the release date. And Horner, kind of rightly so, was like, I can't work with this. And no one can work that fast. And so the result was they had to use a lot of Jerry Goldsmith's score from the original Alien in the release. They used about 20 or 30% of it. And Horner just got really upset, and he stormed off and said, I'll never work with this guy again. And then Cameron came back a couple of years later and asked him to score The Abyss, and Horner said no. And then he came back again, but I think the reason why it worked this time was because Cameron had shifted. He shifted out of sci-fi scores and was interested in making a picture that is kind of triple placed in terms of genre. It's kind of a historical epic. It's a real drama. It's also a romance. And then it's a real special effects movie. And then they both also agreed on a soundscape that they came to independently, which is they really wanted to highlight the Celtic theme of the Irish passengers, right? So they both said, and it should sound like Enya. We need Enya in there, right? And since they both kind of came to that independently, I think Horner said, okay, I'll try this again. And to me, that sets up something interesting, because apparently Cameron approached Enya about like kind of scoring this, and she said, I don't really work in a collaborative way, so that's not an option. I think they probably couldn't afford her to be the soloist. So Horner actually tapped another singer. So I think it's important for listeners to understand there's a lot of vocalizing in the score. There's a wordless soprano singing. That's not Celine at all. He actually tapped somebody else. It was a Norwegian singer. Her name is Sissel Kjærsbo. She was very well known in Scandinavian circles. She has a really beautiful voice and very Enya-like, right?
She does.
And then all of the choir sounds around that are just electronic. He actually didn't even hire a choir for that. So he just kind of, I think it was easier for him to control. He said he didn't want it to sound like a church. So we have a lot of wordless choir, but a wordless voice that really makes for a very hauntingly beautiful score. I have to say that was a really wise choice. This is maybe the one criticism that Horner has, is that he kind of repeats sounds. So a lot of people were a little bit disappointed with the Titanic score in the sense that it sounded a little bit like Braveheart recycled. But, I think it's really serviceable. And this is what Horner was really good at doing, was, writing for the moment. And the score, I think, is really successful at that.
So how did My Heart Will Go On become the song of the movie, like without being in the movie, right? It won Best Song, but it's over the credits. How should we think about My Heart Will Go On in terms of the relationship to Horner and the rest of the film musically?
How that song came about is rather interesting, because Cameron had said from the outset to Horner, no song. And I think that's because he really wanted this to be a serious film and to really showcase his special effects. It was this huge budget, $200 million film. We all went to see it because of that. And I don't think he wanted this to be turned into any kind of romance. I mean, the trope of romance is that there needs to be a hit song over it, right? And he really didn't want to position the film in that way. But Horner did this kind of tricky thing, because I think all along he thought there was a song in there. He says what he did was he scored the film, and then once that was done, he kind of stitched together some fragments and made a song, hired a lyricist to write the lyrics, and then without Cameron knowing, he approached Celine Dion to think about recording it. And then this gets interesting to me, because first of all, he did go all the way to Vegas and met with Celine, and he played it for her on the piano. And the whole time, and Celine tells the story, and it's really funny, because you can see many YouTube videos. She's saying to her husband manager in the background while Horner's playing the piano, she's like, no. She didn't like the song. And she also seemed to resist, doing this kind of power ballads for movies and television. She's like, that's not me. It doesn't showcase me. And her husband kind of said, well, let's give it a shot. And then Horner said, well, you're not hearing the whole orchestration. You don't hear like the whistles and the Celtic pipes. It'll be better if we did it in its kind of instrumentation that I want. So will you do a demo? And she did sing for that. She's like, I just did one take, did it over that. And then Horner says, so I took that demo and I just put it in my pocket. And then he said, in the editing, post-production, I happened to be with Cameron on a really good day when he was really excited. One of his special effects was working really well, and he was in a good mood. So I brought out, I got something for you to hear. And he said, I played the tape for him. And he's like, oh, that's really great. And so he agreed to let it be part of the score. I think probably because he really owed James Horner, because he had treated him so poorly on Aliens. He owed him a little. So he's like, yeah, we'll put it over the end credits. And the funny thing was they just used the demo. What's great is that Celine's voice is so tremendous. Yeah. But she goes to great lengths to let you know what plays over the end credits is really this demo. She has since recorded it many times with full orchestra, and it has better settings on her album that came out the following year. But it's a pretty funny thing that she didn't really like it, and Cameron didn't really like it. Horner really liked it. And I think he's a little bit disingenuous when he says, I just I finished scoring it, and then I thought, oh, I'll just kind of stitch together the fragments and make it. But if you watch the film, it's in there every time Rose and Jack together, and it's in its full glory. Yeah. He totally knew he was writing a pop song, and he sticks it in there in the bow scene. It's in there when she's getting drawn, and then in the car scene. I mean, it's in its full splendor already. So I think Horner really wrote that knowing he was going to write a pop song too. And he had not done that before. He wanted to try his hand at that. And it was a really good gamble because it made him tons of money. It won him an Oscar for song and score. It worked.
It is just so interesting also because the song was so big, and it's not in the movie until the credits, but I hadn't thought about the fact that because the sound of it is throughout the movie, even though you don't hear the song until the end credits, it's still reminiscent of the film in a significant way. How financially successful was the soundtrack, and how did all of that play out?
Oh, huge. It was the number one best-selling soundtrack of all time, and that year it was the number one hit song. The first soundtrack song to hit the charts was kind of unheard of. And then I think it has lasted since then. I think it's still like in the top 10 of all times in terms of, sales for sure. But I think it was a little bit of an accident, right? If the movie hadn't been as big, it wouldn't have been as popular. If she hadn't been as important or as a singer, it wouldn't have been as popular. It was a real perfect storm. And if Horner hadn't kind of preloaded it into the score, it wouldn't have been as big a thing.
Julie, thank you so much. You're always such a delight and just treasure trove of knowledge. We're so grateful.
Well, I love movies and I love talking about them, and I love talking about how the music just really is such an important part of our viewing experience, and I'm always happy to stop and talk about it.
You've been listening to Hot and Bothered. We are a small show, so we need your support to run. If you can, please consider supporting us on patreon.com/hotandbotheredrompod. If you love the show, please consider leaving us a review wherever you are listening. We are a Not Sorry production. We're a feminist production company. I'm the executive producer, and we are edited and produced by Ariana Nettleman and distributed by Acast. Thanks this week to our beloved Russell Mafe and Julie Hubbert. Thanks as always to our soulmate level patrons, Molly Reilly, who we would chase through an airport to declare our love to, Becky Boo, who we would wait for hours on the top of the Empire State Building for, Elizabeth Schweinsberg, whose heart we would play a game of one-on-one basketball for, and Lauren Byer O'Connell, who we would call up on stage to dance with us in front of the whole summer camp. And to our wonderful team, Julia Argy, Nikki Zoltan, AJ Aramas, Courtney Brown, and Stephanie Paulsell. Thanks, everyone. We'll talk to you next week.